error this time, but this online presentation will give you pretty much what I wanted to talk about. But firstly, I want to thank CVR in particular for past hospitality and visits to the River Valley campus, and I was very pleased to be able to find this photograph online. Tagging of structured bibliographic data. What is it that we want with this? Well, the easiest way to show that is with an explicit example. So that's what I'm going to do. I'll switch to an example document and we'll see the kinds of stuff that we can do with tagging. Okay, so here's the document that we want to look at. You can see for the bookmarks here that there are 10, 11 sections, and each of these sections has a bibliography. So let's have a look at it in tagging view. And the first bibliography occurs here. But what is the structure of a bibliography? Well, it's a kind of a section. Tagging here is sect. It has a title and it has a list. In this case, just two elements in the list. And each list item has a label. This is using author year style. And so the label is made up of the author and the year with a little bit of punctuation in between and at the end. And you can see the actual values of the author field and the value of the year field. The L body for the list entry, well, it consists of more information, which is bibliographic information. So it has the standard tag of bib entry, and Miller et al. 2023 was the key, the bibliography key that was used in generating this bibliography element. And it has the fields, the heading, some punctuation, the journal title, punctuation, which is just a space, volume number, some more punctuation, and a page, a starting page in this case. Some punctuation, and then followed by a DOI, which is a reference to an external location. So that one only had two entries. If we look in section 2, we have a larger bibliography. It's here. And again, title, the list of entries, all the different bib items, and they're all structured in a similar way. This one is an article, the title here. This title is interesting in that it also has a bit of extra text which is in a different style, and so that gets tagged separately. All these names, bib-title, bib-journal title, they're custom style names, but they are all in fact role mapped to span, and so when you export this into another format, they'll be treated as just spans of text, which is how they appear in the visual view of the bibliography. So here's a picture which is of a different part of this, or a different bibliography, but it shows the correspondence between the information and the information is supplied by the author in the file bib.tex, which biblatex uses, putting together what it needs and then further processing it. Each of the different fields is here with the name. One thing that is slightly different is that the journal, instead of just being the name, instead of being just bib-journal, it's bib-journal title, because at some point in the biblatex processing, that name has been changed. But the data is the same. The data is the correct data. The long DOI field here is something that I've defined myself, which is used for making sure that, well, okay, if you look back at what's happening up here, if you put the DOI starting there, then the link would cut across the end of the line, and so it forces an extra line break before the DOI is placed. It's easier to type to to do the tagging of a link this way than it is to allow the link to break across lines. Well, here's a view of what happens when such a bibliography is part of a derivation into HTML from this document. And you can see what's happening here. The label is at the top and it's indented to the left with respect to the rest of the information. Here I'm using a web inspector view to show the actual HTML tagging as well as the result up the top. How do we achieve this kind of tagging? So we need to discuss that. And okay, if one looks here, I'm showing a section of the documentation for biblatex. These guys, Philip Keim, Moritz Wemheuer, and Philippe Lehmann, they've done a fantastic job with biblatex. So they have this concept of blocks of units and punctuation between units. Okay, so we've seen a fair bit of that already. The main thing is that the blocks consist of several of the fields, and each of those fields is treated as a separate unit. So unit here is being used in a sense as a technical term. And then this documentation mentions various macros and which need to come at certain places. And these are important to us. When it comes to actually printing the results or printing the information, then these ones, print text, print field, print list, print names, bib string, these are all very important. And it turns out that we're going to need to patch some of these. In order to do that tagging that I showed you, you need to patch some of these to some extent. There's 2 pages there, so there's two images. How things done in biblatex, they use these drivers, a bibliography driver. So this is an example of the bibliography driver for book. This is taking the actual source out of the package file. And you can see how certain kinds of fields are grouped together. So if you like, that's a block. Okay, here's an example of how the print command would start. There's a testing whether the field is defined or not. If it's not defined, you don't do anything. If it is defined, then you want to print the field. But the point I want to make here is that there are so many of these driver files for all the different types of entries, and they can vary with different bibliography styles, that there's no way that you would ever be wanting to try to patch all of these. There's so many of them, and you don't even know whether the information is there or not in any particular entry. So patching at this level just is not on. In order to try and understand this a little bit better, I wanted to get some pictures that illustrate some of the concepts. And so the idea of blocks of units, well, I came up with this idea. In Australia, we call an apartment building a block of units. People live in separate units of the places where the people live. In other countries, you might call those apartments. And the block, well, usually they're quite tall, several levels, and well, that's all the apartment building, let's say. Or another way of supposing a family was having a special holiday, special family reunion, where all different members of the family, the cousins and the uncles and grandparents and all of that, were all going off to stay at a motel or booked into a holiday resort, and you'd make a block booking of units for each of the families that are coming, or one family would make a block booking and another family would make their own block booking. So that's the kind of idea that I wanted to capture. And then I thought, well, okay, it's census day and you're collecting information. I want to draw an analogy there between the bibliographic information and collecting information for a census. If we abstract that a little bit further, maybe it's a single household and the individual units could be the people that are involved there, and the blocks would be related to the kinds of work that they were doing in that house or how they were related to the head of the house. So I found this lovely old picture from the 1861 census, and you see the head of the household is filling in a register and getting information, recording information for all the different people. Here's the kind of information that they're filling out, but this one is actually pretty special. if you can read this, it says Buckingham Palace and Her Majesty Victoria. This is Queen Victoria. This is a photograph of the actual register that was filled out in the census of the year 1851, taking place at Buckingham Palace. The block and unit structure, well, okay, you've got the block. These are all the immediate family, and the Queen and Albert, this should be, and Prince of Wales. But this is the one I like the most. This is more modern, and you can see how complicated the collection of information can be. And on the right-hand side, I want to contrast that with a driver file for, say, the report documents, just giving us an idea of the complications of the information that we're having to deal with. So what do we actually do? Well, we need to identify the places in the code that's being executed by biblatex where we can add in extra stuff to do the structural tagging. We need to also place things into the content stream, designating the start and end of each piece of content, which includes punctuations. And so we need to identify where these places are, and we either need to put hooks there or somehow patch an existing macro, giving it an opportunity to do some extra work as well as what it would normally do. And so in the next slides, we want to identify these places, and this will end up involving an idea that we call hierarchical patching. What I'm not going to do is show the explicit coding to do everything, because different people will be doing tagging in different ways. There's the LaTeX. LaTeX is developing tagging, which will be available to everybody eventually, but current pre-press houses like River Valley have produced their own way of doing tagging, and I've also produced my way of doing tagging. So I'm not going to show you the details of that, but showing how to find and to establish appropriate places for hooks, and say something about the biblatex macros which do need to be patched, but patched within a context so that they work when they need to work, but just allow biblatex to do what it naturally needs to do in cases where you are not doing any tagging. So we've seen how the basic piece of information that needs to be set is in a unit. So this is how a unit begins. BLX at beg unit, so the beginning of a unit, and you can see there are tests to basically say, are we going to need this information or do we not need it, and what to do. So often what to do is nothing if you don't need it, but if you do need it, then there could be punctuation to finish off the field that you've previously set and it hasn't been closed off yet, or there could be special stuff happening giving the relationship between what this new unit is and what came previously. But in fact, there's really only one place that needs to be patched, and that's down here. And it's marked here as a mode switch. What I mean by that is that leave vmode, well, LaTeX has a macro called /leave vmode, and it's used when you are finishing a block of information that's been collected vertically and starting something which is going to be stacked horizontally, or in other words, you're starting a new paragraph or maybe just a single sentence, and so you're switching from vertical mode to horizontal mode. So quite clearly, if you're going to be doing that, then this is a place where you've finished all that vertical stuff, and so any tagging associated with that can be closed off, and you're starting new stuff so you can prepare for the new stuff. It turns out that BLX at leave vmode is used in other places as well as just here within the beginning of a unit, so you actually need to check that your leave vmode is being followed by begin group, so that this is in fact the place where you're at. And so you're going to need a macro, so this is going to be the name of the macro that's going to end up replacing this. It looks ahead for the next token, and then examines that token. So that's what this part does. It examines that token. If that token is begin group, then we are going to do something which is clearly related to creating hooks to allow us to do tagging. If it's not begin group, then just do what you otherwise would have done with leave vmode. And then for the unit hooks, what can we do? Well, it's the definition involves a pattern which picks up the word begin group. So it picks up that begin group. We know it's coming because we wouldn't be here otherwise. We can put in here a hook which allows us to do what we need to do with respect to structure. Then we do the usual thing that leave vmode would do. And then we do our begin group. So we're just doing what this would have done if there was no patching here. And then before we actually get to the content, we can now have another hook, which is to be used for setting up for patching content. So that leaves us with two things that need to be done. At some point, we need to capture the original meaning of leave vmode. And then at some point, we need to assign a new meaning to BLX at leave vmode, which is going to do our macro that checks out that we're at the right place and then provides us with the hooks when that's where we are. And then tagging is done via those hook macros. Okay, so the structure at hook, it sets up our tagging for a structure, and that structure needs a name, and so it gets that name from the value of a field which that our coding defines. It should have a value at this stage, so we need to check out how that gets the value, but we'll look at that in the next slide. The content hook, it can have further hooks which can allow you to adapt for, if you like, field-specific variation in how the content, punctuation, and bibliography strings are to be handled. There's two of these. One of them depends just on the field value itself, the other the field value and the entry type, okay, because different entry types might handle the same information in different ways. We need both of these. And it turns out that we also need to have an extra hook back up here in the structure, and I call this pre-hook, because in certain entry types and certain field names, there could be stuff that needs to be done before you actually provide the new structure. Okay, so this is a very special one. It's not used very much, but I have found instances where it was necessary to use a hook here. So how do we get that name? Well, here's the coding, the biblatex coding for print field. Print field is an alias for an internal macro, BLX at internal macro print field, and it first does a check, basically saying, well, if you give me the name of the field, is it actually defined for our particular entry here? And if the answer is no, then there's nothing to do, no unit. Otherwise, we want to work out, well, how is this supposed to be handled? What's the format of the information? What's going to control it? And so it checks, puts all the stuff together and works out whether there's a value to this, which is going to tell us how to do the formatting. And that formatting is down here. So once we've established what the formatting should be, it gets fed the value of the field content, which comes out of this kind of structure. And of course, we have to begin the unit. Yeah, so that's a mistake. That shouldn't be next slide. It was previous slide. We've already looked at that on the previous slide. What we need to do is we need to patch this particular command in order to pick up what that field name is, store it in a place that which we can then use. And we saw this on the previous slide, how we needed this when working out how to tag the structure. There's more stuff you can do at this point, but then you go and do what this should have done in the first place, or what it's intended to do if there wasn't any tagging. So we've inserted new processing before the coding does what it normally would do. And this is all happening at a place which is appropriate. Now, how do we get all this stuff working? We need to patch this to that, make this call up that instead of do what it normally does. So we need some coding which tells it to make that switch and where should that happen. To determine that, we go back and have a look at what happens when we call up a bib item. When we encounter a bib item in the bibliography, the pink numbers here indicate as many as 9 different places where you might consider you'd be able to do something. It turns out that you really only need to patch at one place, and that's here. If we had numbered labels, so a different kind of bibliography style, well, we don't do that in author year, so this one is actually not used, and so we can actually ignore this, okay? However, if we were going to use numbered styles, well, then we probably would want to put something around here. But in our case, we don't. So it turns out that there's really only the one place that needs to be patched, and that is what happens at this stage. And this is effectively where you get, right, remember we're in a list of items, and so this is where the item command comes in, and so it's where we're beginning a new item in a list, and so something definitely should be done at that point. If we have a macro like this, okay, we really only need one single macro here, but it's a very complicated one. It has a complicated pattern. Okay, so here's our big language bib. So in other words, everything in here is going to be picked up as the number 1. Then between big language bib and page tracker, that's going to be our number 2, this bib sentence there. And then our number 3 is going to be all this stuff here in blue, which is where the actual driver content is processed down to the end lang bib. So that complicated pattern is matched, and we're picking up 3 parameters. What we're going to replace this with is something which sets everything up for the tagging of our list item. Then it does what it normally would have done. It then does the number 1 and the big language bib and the number 2 and the page tracker. After that, we set up for the L body, and that includes a parameter which is in fact the field name title. There's something that needs to be done there. There'll be complicated coding involved. And then we do everything else for finishing off the L body, because everything else is happening in this blue stuff. Okay, so that's what happens there as the number 3. And then we finish off the L body, finish the language, and then finishing off the list item, the tagging of the list item itself. So that's complicated macro, but it can go in there and handle all of the tasks that need to be done. And the important ones are starting the list item, starting the body of the list item, finishing off the body, and then finishing off the list item. Obviously 4 important things that need to be done with respect to tagging. So we saw how print field gets picked up to give us the name of the field. Turns out there's actually 5 things there that need to be patched in the same way. So there's the internal if field undef, and then there's a shortened version which actually does the same thing, but it needs to be patched as well. For lists, there's the if list undef, the internal version and the shortened version. And then we have a collection of names, and there's the if name undef that needs to be redefined, or at least the internal version, in order to simply to pick up the name of the field and maybe do a few other things that aren't going to affect the typesetting in any way before checking whether we actually need this for anything. A few other things that need to be changed, that need to be patched: bib string, wrap bib string, and also print text. I'm going to skip over the punctuation details because we'll be running short on time, but there's some examples here of where different amounts of punctuation are used. And well, it turns out that we need to get the punctuation correct. The idea with the punctuation is that you really want to, you don't want to have separate tagging of all bits of punctuation. You'd like some of them to be combined. If they're adjacent to each other, you want things to be combined. And in order to achieve that, to get the nicest effect, then a lot of things need to be looked at. There's more detailed tagging. So the actual details of that tagging I'm not going to discuss, just to give an indication of some of what you can do here, right? So here, if the punctuation was something like add colon, add space, if that's what our punctuation macro expands into, then we want to replace it with a tagged version. Okay, so colon, add space, tagged version. And similarly, add comma, add space, we want to replace that with a tagged version. So that you'd have this kind of macro you might use at some appropriate place. And again, styling in titles, we saw how we could have styles in titles. We saw how we can do that. So this gives some other examples. Here's a little bit of what looks like mathematical notation. It's actually for chemical symbols, but we can pick that up and handle that appropriately. And here's another case with, okay, so this is interesting. The overall style of the title is italic already, and you're wanting to put in another italic part, just like it was up here. So you don't see the difference visually, but structurally it is there. A summary of patching. So here's our hierarchical patching idea. We need to set up the subsection, which handles the bibliography as a whole. Start the environment, the bibliography environment, finish the bibliography environment. So these things need to be patched. But in the patching of this, we can then do further patching of what's going to occur within that bibliography environment. So we have to patch the @bibitem command, and that also needs an adjustment to another internal biblatex command. And item of bibliography. Okay, we saw how that was needed to create that pattern with the three separate arguments in between particular macro names. So we need to get that into place. This provides us with the prepare for L body, for LI, and prepare for L body, and each of those does various things. So here's some of the punctuation that needs to be patched. We saw where the finish at L body was used and where the finish at LI is used. Okay, so we needed those in place. And then the preparing for L body is, we need these to be patched, and various other ones that need to be patched. So that's the kind of hierarchical patching idea. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say, but except maybe what else can be done. Okay, biblatex has this concept of entry sets. We haven't done that yet. We haven't implemented tagging for those. Other bibliography styles, we can do work on doing those. We've only done author year at the moment. The more cases that we actually encounter, we may find more things that need to be done. So more hooks that need to be defined, work out what needs to be done in various special cases. Okay, another idea is to provide expanded text for common abbreviations. If the word is to be spoken out, you might as well say the whole word volume rather than vol dot. And for eds dot, you might just read out the word editors. And for this one, what is it going to say? You prefer to hear the word lines, because that's what that abbreviation stands for. And then, of course, there can be adaptation into different languages. Right, biblatex handles that. We haven't tried to do any special tagging for that yet. So that's pretty much all that I wanted to say. So thank you, everyone. And I hope that I've given you a reasonable understanding of the kind of stuff that can be done. Thank you.
Rose has joined us online, so if any of you have a question, you can ask now.
Rose, can you hear us?
Yeah. This could you hear us?
Okay. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Hear us?
Very well, yes.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, great. Yeah, sorry, I was watching the YouTube video and it seems to be out of whack with what you're seeing. So, yeah, I'm ready for questions now.
So this bibliography tagging.
Yes.
What is the XML output that you will get through these references? The PDF tag.
Well, I'm not directly doing XML tagging. I'm doing PDF tagging, and so but if you do use Acrobat and do a save as XML from Acrobat, the XML tagging is actually very, very good. But of course, there is no schema that it's meant to satisfy. It'll use it'll use those structure names that we made up as custom structures, which are bib dash followed by the field name, and then the data from the field will be there. So
it's possible to get back to.
It's not specific.
It's
not geared. Yeah, sorry, not geared for it. Not. Well, yeah. I mean, you should then be able to take that into BibTeX, and it will probably work. I mean, you may have to do a little bit of adjustment, remove that bib dash prefix at the front, but it should. The intention is that kind of thing should work. You should be able to write a tool to make that work.
Okay, that's it. So I was just wondering whether BibTeX is the standard or is there something else? I'm just wondering.
No, it's just using the, well, okay, biblatex changed one of the field names, right? So instead of journal, it became journal title. That was part of the biblatex processing. But if you want to extract it out to make a valid bibtex file, then one of the things you do is change journal title back to being just journal. That's,
Yeah, there's so many.
you've got to do some work. You don't get everything for nothing. You've got to you have to do a bit of work, depending on what it is you want.
Any other questions?
Hello.
Yeah. Hi.
So the question is something like connected to the earlier one, something like that of it's work only for the bib data file, am I right?
Yeah, my talk title was this is a case study. So this is what I've done to show how, and the main point of it is to indicate the places where you need to do extra stuff in order to get the tagging working. Right, that was the whole point of it. In fact, that was basically in response to a question that CVR asked to the TUG organizer, or to the TUG board. He had mentions that biblatex was something that he found particularly difficult to work with, and so I've decided to, since I'd actually done a little bit of stuff with biblatex, I decided to do it a lot more, and I was showing you that kind of stuff, right? So identifying the way, there's no simple patching. You have to do a much more complicated patching than just what you do for a single environment, because you've got all of these fields which are related to each other in complicated ways. And they have all this extra punctuation between them. You have extra words that biblatex puts in itself, or your bibliography style puts in itself. And you need to identify what is stuff that was provided through the original fields and what is stuff that has been provided by the package itself. And you want to make sure you can tell which is which.
And one more connected question is something like that of when the PDF is tagged with this bib data or bib, the command what you embedded bib label and all. So in that case, the readers can recognize the command and read it appropriately, or something need to be developed on the applications like Foxit Reader or Adobe side.
I'm sorry, I think you're asking me to do a bit more than what I've said I was doing. Right, so this is meant to be a talk to show people who didn't yet understand why tagging is necessary or why it's useful. I think in Frank's talk, he showed exactly what that is. And in my talk, I'm showing you how you can do an awful lot more than just what you need in order to make sense of ordinary information. This is highly structured information, and you can make an awful lot of headway with making sense of that as well.
Any more questions? Thank you, Ross.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you.